Hi, and welcome to episode 18 of the Leadership Development Armory. We're going through a series of understanding the different generations that youth leaders interact with. Today, we'll be hearing about understanding Generation Alpha. I hope you enjoy. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Development Armory. Welcome to those of you who this is your first time. We're so happy that you're joining us. My name is Summer Bussey, and I am the Territorial Christian Education Director for our Western Territory Youth Department. And this is actually our 4th season of the Armory, which is kind of crazy. It's like kept going for this long. But we are really excited to be exploring a new series about understanding the different types of people groups that our youth leaders are interacting with, you guys. And for this series, we're going to be talking about understanding different generations of people. And we're going to be talking about understanding Generation Alpha, which is this meeting. We'll talk about understanding Generation Z, talking about millennial parents and Generation X leadership. And just as a quick reminder, one of our goals for this Armory is to create a space for diligent learning to develop and equip youth leaders. And we want this to be a safe space to just learn new things, ask questions, and make connections with other leaders in the Salvation Army. So we're really happy that all of you guys decided to join us today. Today's presentation is called Understanding Generation Alpha, and it's going to be led by Major Emmanuel Masango. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the characteristics and values within Generation Alpha and ways that we can reach out and disciple to this specific group. I'm going to ask our newest member of the youth department, Alyssa, to pray for us so that we can get started.
All right. Gracious God, we come before you today with hearts full of gratitude for just the opportunity to come together and just share and learn with one another new ways to better serve your kingdom. I pray for our speaker today, Lord, Major Emmanuel, that your hands are just over him as he speaks. Lord, I pray that his words are filled with your truth and your wisdom, Lord. I just pray that you allow us to just learn how to bring people closer to your kingdom and just help us build our relationships with you and with one another. In your name I pray, amen.
Thank you. Emmanuel, take it away.
Welcome, everybody. Good to see you all. I saw a few of you at TYLC last week or 2 weeks ago. Good to see you. So as we get going, I want to start off with a little quiz. You don't have to unmute yourself for the answer. Just type it in the chat. To warn you, there are no prizes, but I'm still expecting a lot of participation. So here's the first one. All right, if I can move to the next slide. Let's see. All right. Here's the first question. All right, looks like Graham chimed in first there. Good job. Next question. It is not Taylor Swift. It's Beyonce. Lady Gaga, I like that. All right, next question. Mr. Beast is correct, not Mr. Beats. Mr. Beast is correct. And the last question. Charisma is right. It's good. Anyway, this is kind of a silly exercise, but also one of the ways we could really understand young people. So today we're going to talk about Gen Alpha, and this is information that many of them know on their fingertips. If you ask them these questions, they could probably answer you right away, or they'll be willing to Google or these days ask AI what AI thinks or says. And so today, just talking about understanding Gen Alpha, it may be a different way of saying this is how do we reach and disciple them? If we're going to reach and disciple Gen Alpha, we need to be able to understand them. It's harder to reach people that we do not understand, or maybe we'll go about it the wrong way. So as we get going, just a quick overview on the generations. This is information you can easily find on Google. But Gen Alpha, what we're talking about today, is kids born years 2010 to 2025, or some years will say 2011, like the graphic, or 2013. So the kids born between 2010 and 2013 roughly is what we're talking about, all the way up to 2025. So that's Gen Alpha. Gen Z, Millennial, Gen X, you can see some of those things. But today I just wanted to focus on Gen Alpha. These are kids that are in elementary school up to middle school. What's kind of curious right now for myself, my family, I have 3 boys. I have 2 of them in middle school, one born in 2010 and the other born in 2013. So they are definitely Gen Alpha. So for me, it's not just something I'm looking at from a distance. It's kids living in my own house, and I'm trying to lead them and guide them in Christ. So just some characteristics on Gen Alpha to share with you. Like I said, kids born between 2010 through 2025. They're also children of millennials. So if the parents are millennials or the parents are Gen Z, and some of you on the call, you might be a millennial or you might be a Gen Z, and you might actually be, a parent who has kids in that age range we're talking about. So they're digital natives, meaning that they have, oh yeah, I'm sorry, Millennial and Gen Z is the same thing. Somebody I think just corrected me. Sorry, that's a good one, Gen X. Digital natives, they are tech savvy, means they know technology. I remember being at DYS and going to different core, and when we got to a place, the first question my kids would ask me was, what's the Wi-Fi password? Like, that's not a question I ever asked as a kid, definitely not, even as an adult. But for them, when you get to a place, you have a phone, you have an iPad, you have some kind of tablet, the first thing you want to do is connect to the internet because they want to be able to connect with people. They're highly connected, like I just said, through social media. They've got phones, they've got tablets. And it's just for our family really fascinating. Even sometimes when we sit at the dinner table, that all 5 of us have a device close to us. So we have to remind ourselves, hey, put those away, not just for the kids, but even for us as adults. They have quick access to information. My 2 older kids recently were applying for jobs to work at camps. And I was like, hey, your dad has done a few interviews, has interviewed people before. I'm here to help you. No, thanks, because they're just looking online. What do you do to prepare for an interview? And so even sometimes at the dinner table, when I say, hey, let's put phones away, sometimes I see one of them with the phone and say, why do you have your phone now? Or they can say, oh, I was just looking this up. So sometimes as we're talking, rather than asking questions out loud, they just bring out their device to look for an answer. So as a parent, for me, that's helping me to say, maybe even in ministry, there's definitely a point to say, let's put devices aside, but maybe there's a way of bringing the devices into how you're teaching or delivering a lesson, or saying, can somebody open up, your Bible app to this book of the Bible so you can read for us. So we have to find a way of interacting with the technology and the quick access they have to information. The next thing is they have a short-term span, which a lot of us, that's what we know. In fact, these next few characteristics I'm going to share tend to be described, especially by us adults, as negative. So the first list, maybe it's neutral, but this next list we tend to look at, it's like, oh, they've such a short attention span, and it can be a really big frustration for us, especially as adults. But we need to understand this is a characteristic of their generation. It's not their fault. That's just where they are. Shaped by COVID. A lot of them, if you ask them, where were you in 2020, they'll be able to tell you. Some of them are too young to actually be able to express that. But it definitely, when I talk about my own kids, they're shaped by COVID. We occasionally would talk about what doing school online was like. Recently, we're talking about doing PE online, because they would just sit in front of the computer and the teacher would play YouTube. But one of the stories was, oh, all of a sudden an inappropriate commercial came up, and so the teacher to turn the thing off so quick. But that's their reality. A lot of them will have memories of what COVID was like, maybe in the silly, fun stories like that, or maybe as a challenge that they went through as a family or as individuals. They are highly inspired by influencers. Like I gave, just example of popular people like, Beyonce or some other famous person, Mr. Beast. Like my kids introduced me to Mr. Beast. And when we go to Target, they want to go try the Mr. Beast bar, like, what is this? But they're making connections with people online, and now they're going to spend money to connect with the people that they already are considering influencers. So these are characteristics we have to be aware of as ministers and youth leaders. They question everything. Questioning everything may not be something that we grew up with. I know for my personality, I don't tend to question things verbally. I will question things mentally, but not verbally. But these young people are willing to ask questions, and it's not a bad thing. Again, sometimes as people of faith, we're like, if a young person is asking questions about God or scriptures, instead of maybe looking at that as a good thing, sometimes we get very defensive because we think they're coming from a place of disagreeing with the scriptures. A lot of times they're really just wanting to understand, or maybe they're actually trying to help us articulate what we believe. So rather than getting flustered or maybe afraid of questions, it's okay to have questions. They may not always like the answer we guide them to, but questions in themselves are not a bad thing. Some of them may have some background in church or a family that they used to go to church. Some of them may not altogether. So maybe our interaction with them, either in a camp setting, or maybe we've invited them to a core event, or we've invited them to a divisional youth event. This may be the first time they're hearing about Jesus. One of the things we have to do is adjust our vocabulary. We can't just assume that they know what we're talking about. So if you say, hey, remember the story of Jonah and the boat? They don't remember it because they've never heard it before. So we have to start thinking when we're ministering to people or evangelizing or even discipling the young people we have, we can't use the language we've always used because they may not be familiar with it. One of my favorite challenge, and I was just posing this challenge to my kids recently, is when we use the word the gospel. As adults, we might know what that means, but a kid may not know what that means. So I say, hey, what do we mean? What does the word gospel mean? Oh, it's good news, but what does good news mean? And so make sure as we need to simplify our language, but still communicating the truth of what the word of God is. And in the Salvation Army, we make that a little more complicated with our acronyms and all those other things. So we have to simplify our language, especially because they may not have a faith or a background in church at all. So the other thing they are is that they're critical thinkers. They're not just taking your word for everything. So again, sometimes in this area of space, in the space of faith, we may feel challenged because of their thinking, but it's actually not a bad thing. Again, our role might be to help mold them or teach them to have a godly worldview or biblical worldview. But being a critical thinker in itself is not a bad thing, but we can help them come alongside to discovering the truth with us. They're very innovative. Again, because of the technology and the access to information, they're all constantly doing things. Like I said, I'm going to use a lot of examples from my kids because I have two of them in that age range. They introduced me to this thing called CapCut. Anybody know what that is? You can raise your hand or your digital hand. Alyssa knows what that is. I'm looking for other hands or digital hands. I got a few. Okay, so it's basically like an app that helps you edit videos, and you can, put all these little video clips together. And I didn't know that until 2 months ago, but my kids taught me that. And so instead of me saying, "Whoa, I'm the dad, I know everything," I'm like, "Hey, could you help me do this?" And they showed me how to edit it. So I'm thinking for us, this is an opportunity to use this innovation in this young generation to figure out ways of involving them in our ministries and giving them a place of belonging. So instead of maybe feeling threatened by what they know, we could really engage them in what we're doing. They're risk takers. They're willing to try things maybe that we wouldn't try, or we always had a parent looking over us saying, don't do this, don't try this. They're willing to try things. We also then, as adults that care for them in our life, in their lives, we can mentor them and show them how we can, still be risk takers, but really be thinking through what am I doing in this space and in this time, and lead them to making good choices. They're multitaskers. I think I was sharing with our staff, one of the things that frustrates me at home is if my kids are playing video games, but then they're also on the phone. I'm like, how many things are you doing at once? So I'm always like, say, either turn off the game or turn off the phone. And lately I'm like, I don't know, I got to figure out some middle ground. But imagine if these are the people trying to reach. How do we reach them if they're multitaskers? Is there a way that we can actually use this as a point of connection versus a point of contention? So some of those things we have to think about as leaders. They're very goal oriented. They love to achieve things. They have targets. They have goals. If you ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? It may not be the thing we grew up with. I want to be a policeman, a fireman. I want to be a doctor. They want to be YouTubers and influencers. So what they want to be, their goals are very different from ours. So sometimes it might be easy to dismiss those as unrealistic, but maybe again, we can help guide them to something more realistic without kind of knocking them down. So those are kind of generally some characteristics about Generation Alpha. I just want to talk about their values, the things that really matter to them. Again, they're still really young, age 14 on down, but they're already forming some of the things that really matter to them based on the world that they're growing up in. Some of those will be similar to the characteristics we have about the generation. So one that's really important to them is they're passionate about social justice. I know in America, at least the last few years, the word social justice has brought a lot of contention. Is this biblical? Is it not? A lot of polarization. But this is a reality for young people. They're passionate about social justice. So rather than like shutting them down or telling them, you don't know what you're doing, maybe engage with them and really get to what are they passionate about. If they're passionate about saving the environment, I don't think that's actually a bad thing. So maybe we can find ways of doing, having those conversations with them and being involved with them in a way that makes sense. If they're passionate about feeding the hungry, hello, we're Salvation Army. We run food pantries and homeless shelters. We can invite them into the spaces where they could actually join us in serving. And so this is one I really, for myself, is very close to my heart, social justice. And we have to be able to engage in these conversations with young people. There's definitely topics that are more challenging than others, but maybe instead of just kind of staying on the extreme left, extreme right, I think there's a big, broad space in the middle that we can walk alongside our kids. They value diversity and inclusion, and sometimes, depending on where people land, this can also be a big bone of contention. I actually think this is not a bad thing. In the Salvation Army, we always talk about our churches being very diverse. We have, Latino ministries, we have Korean ministries, we have all sorts of people from all different parts of the world. Like I'm from a whole different country, a whole different culture, but I have a place in the Salvation Army. And so if we could talk about diversity and inclusion with our young people, and really more than talking about it, being able to have that diversity and inclusion within our ranks, within our youth group, within our retreats, that really, really helps them see themselves as people that fit somewhere. They're very aware of what's going on around the globe. Again, we don't always have to agree with their political positions, but they have ideas and feelings about justice in this part of the world or the other world, or the success that is happening in this world versus that other part of the world. Pop culture, for example, I know for a while, I'm not sure if this applies to Gen Alpha, but the next generation up, everybody's crazy about K-pop, but that's a whole other side of the world. So they have a much larger global awareness maybe than we had growing up. Collaboration and cooperation, they value working together with other people. And so I always talk to my kids at school, they do work they do by themselves, and then they do group work. They do work that they collaborate with one another. And if there's a way of us being able to bring that element of collaboration and group work in the church setting, like we're really helping them connect with each other, and then they actually creating the space that they love and to be with each other and belonging. So collaboration and cooperation is a big value. Authenticity, you've probably heard this one quite a bit, really about this last 2 or 3 generations, the idea that who you are is who you are. Like we have to be real, we have to be authentic. So last year, I was asked to speak at one of the youth retreats, and I was asking my kids, they didn't know this, but I was researching teenagers by talking to them. And so I said, hey, can I use the word Riz? They said, Dad, do not use that word. Even though I added it to my quiz day, I did find a way of working it in. But what I learned from them is this: Dad, just be yourself. I don't need to be cool. I don't need to try to be cool. If I'm trying to be cool, it means I'm not cool. So the advice I got from my kids who are Gen Alpha is be yourself. And I would say that to you as well, as you minister daily to the same kids, or maybe at a youth retreat, young adult retreat, instead of trying to come in cool, we can just be ourselves, because that's going to be more valuable to the young people than me trying to be somebody that I'm not, because you can only be cool for 2 minutes and then it's all done if you can last that long. And so what are some of the things that motivate the Generation Alpha? Actually, is there any questions before I move on? I know when I get excited, I start talking really fast. We have some more time for Q&A as well at the end. So if I don't catch you now. So what motivates Gen Alpha? Again, some of this is going to sound similar to their values. There's a sense of purpose and social impact. They want to know, why am I here? And this is one of my favorite things to talk about with young people, with adults even, like, what is my purpose in life? Young as they are, they really want to feel like they're leaving a mark. And so that's something that really motivates them. So as Christians, I'm like, well, we have the perfect opportunity. We're created in the image of God, and each one of us was created in purpose. If we could connect them with that truth, to say the God who has created them is a God who has purpose for them, we can help them discover what that is. They want to have social impact, kind of similar to this idea of being motivated by things of social justice lines, along just social justice lines. They want to know that they're making a difference in their community, whether it's saving the environment, or making sure all the pets that are unadopted in the shelter find a home. In maybe every homeless person actually has a place to be. Like, they have so many different ways they want to be involved in. What is Randy saying over here? He's distracting me. I do not say you can't be cool. You can sure try. uh, Creative outlet. Again, they value creativity. And so if there's a way of finding creativity for them, I remember like the corps that we soldier at right now, the corps officers invited our kids to help plan a youth group, which I thought was really, really cool. So they got to be part of building the program that they're going to be part of. So, use that creative outlet. If it's making video clips, whatever it is, help engage the young people in maybe planning. Maybe you don't want them to plan your lesson for every day that you meet, but maybe once a quarter, you say you have a youth night that is planned by the kids. Like, that would be really exciting. And you can always have a leader who's kind of guiding the conversation to make sure everything's covered. But I would really encourage you to involve the young people in your planning so that you can see their creativity. Continuous learning, they're always learning. Again, most of it's because they have access to information through phones and tablets. They really are always learning new things, and I'm always learning, trying to learn new things from my kids. So if they're always learning, is there a way of us engaging them and helping us learn alongside of them? Or to say, hey, next week we're going to be talking about studying the story about Jonah. You say, hey, can you go read about this and come back and tell me more about it? I don't know, find ways of engaging them, and so that this continuous learning is not just stuff in their heads, but stuff that we can actually connect with. Collaboration is one that I shared again earlier. They also value independence. So sometimes as youth ministers, as leaders, we're so stuck in programming every minute. I know that's my default to program every minute, but is there a way of being creative to say, well, you have a kind of a big schedule, like an outline, and then you give them room in the middle where they feel like they can pick. One of the trick that a lot of core are able to do in camps is you have free time, and in free time you can be here, here, here. They're feeling independent to pick and choose, but you have really set the boundaries. So it's not always about you saying, hey guys, you're going to supervise yourself for the next 30 minutes while I go to Starbucks. That's not what it is. You're really creating this space where you set the boundary and then you give them choices. And it's just amazing when you give them choices, even though you know you have given the 4, and that's really what all they can do. They still feel a lot of freedom within that, being able to make that choice. So how do we reach? So if you know the characteristics, we know what motivates them, we know what their values, how do we reach them? Because ultimately it's not about us just understanding this information and say, okay, I learned something new. It's about how do we actually make it connect with the ministries that we have. And so understanding who they are, which is what we're doing today, hopefully, understanding who they are. But it's not just understanding the young people as a generation in broad terms, but it's then zeroing into the kids that you have in your youth group. So even though there's all this umbrella information that is constant, you have to get to know the individual child. Like I have 3 boys, and they each one have a lot of things they're similar, but they also have things that are very distinct to each and every one of them. Summer gets to hang out with my kids here and there, and she could tell you that all 3 kids have some things that are similar, but there's some things that are really different. So to be able to connect with each one of them, you have to understand what makes them tick. And really, when you think about it, relationships are what really helps us connect with people, and that's how they gain confidence in us, and that's how we get to know them more. Understand their faith background. Like I said earlier, some kids may not have a faith background. Their family may not have been to church in a long time or never. So understanding that will help you connect with them. And you can find that information by just saying, hey, does your family go to another church? Or before you came to the Salvation Army, did you go to a different church? Just find ways of getting this information, not like an interrogation, but really a way of getting to know them. And when you do that, it really helps you kind of get the next step. And one of the things we talk about with Orange Sunday School, part of our strategy is connecting with our faith, with the kids, with their home, like where they get home. Do they have parents or grandparents that are part of their faith family? Do they, do devotions? Do they pray? Because when we know those things, it really helps us get those kids maybe to the next level as we say, hey, connect to grandma. If your grandma prays, yeah, that's a good job. Can you pray about this thing this week and get that home life really connected to what we're doing at the core? Understand and reach their parents. So you have to understand, their parents. Sometimes we know these kids live with their grandpa or grandma or aunt. When we understand that information, it helps us not just reach the kids, but maybe that's an opportunity for us to reach the parents. Like it's not just about getting the kids. I know in the Salvation Army, a lot of times, I know as a core officer, we go pick up the kids, but we never actually know the parents or meet the parents. But what if we desire to not just know the kids, to say, hey, next time I come pick you up, can I get 5 minutes to meet your parents? And sometimes they don't want to meet with you, which is fine. But sometimes just introducing yourself to them and say, hey, next time we have maybe a music performance, would you please join us so you can see your kids at play? And sometimes it's just because we haven't actually extended that invitation. But when you get to meet them, that really kind of helps make that connection with the family. And also understand some family dynamics. I think I kind of touched on that. If the families, maybe the child's parents are split up. So on one weekend they're here, the other weekend they're there. When we understand that information, we're not saying, oh, why didn't you show up last week? You can say, hey, when you were at your dad's house last time, how did that go? Or what was your visit like? So when you understand the family, that helps you connect with the child better as well. So another thing with the reaching them, I'll just do another slider here and then I'll open up for questions. So when we communicate, whether we're sharing the Bible lesson or maybe doing announcements, one of my least favorite things to do is announcements, because announcements tend to be lengthy and they take they take so much time. But if we're communicating to the kids, find a way of making it clear. This is the announcements, this expectation, or when you're teaching a Bible lesson, this is the object lesson, this is the Bible lesson, this is the application, so that we're communicating this, whatever it is, whether it's an announcement or the gospel, communicate those things as clearly and as concisely as we can. If you're teaching, I highly encourage you to use visuals. I am the worst person at visuals. When I am preaching or teaching, I usually go to my wife, Jennifer, and say, hey, what visual could work for this? Because I'm more of a storyteller. But not everybody learns the same way. So if you can have something visual when you're teaching, that really goes a long way. And whatever technology is available, maybe it's a TV, or like I said earlier, if you can involve the kids. Sorry, I just hit the cup over. If you can involve the kids in the teaching, maybe they are using their phones, whatever that is, use something that helps them get involved and have more of a connection with the lesson. Again, simplify your language. Watch all the Salvation Army jargon or all those King James references. And then create engaging and meaningful experiences. So when the kids come to the core, like when they leave, what memory are they taking with them? Oh, we were sitting around for 10 minutes waiting for things to happen. Or are they going to remember those moments that they came in, you welcomed them, they got to participate, they got to help choose the snack, or this month, this is the lesson that we help plan. This is the youth night that we help plan. So make sure that the experiences we're creating are engaging and meaningful. It doesn't have to be big money, big budgets, or lights and all that stuff. It doesn't have to be, it can be meaningful even if you have 5 or 10 kids only. But sometimes that's what we think of is like, oh, I can duplicate what they did at TYLC or at DYR. Like find what's meaningful and what makes sense locally. And then offer opportunity for collaboration. I've probably said collaboration 20 times, so I'll move on. I'm just gonna kind of skip this because it's the same thing. I want to leave time for you guys to ask questions.
So we did have one question in the chat from, and it basically says, do you have any advice on how to navigate teens who have phones and those who do not? It seems like to be a point of contention within our youth programs.
I'm sorry, Summer, I can't hear you for some reason.
Oh, hello? Can you hear me now? Hello?
I can hear you. I don't know why he can't.
I can hear you through here, but not everything.
Oh.
Is it in the chat?
Yeah, it's in the chat, yeah.
Okay, what's the question by?
Elisha Ray.
Alicia,
sorry.
Sorry, I'm looking.
she's a teen herself, so she's asking if she can have her phone during groups, I think.
I'm 26.
Sorry, I didn't hear the person. Who's the person?
One second.
It's Alicia Ray.
Lawrence? I'm sorry, Florence?
Alicia Ray.
Alicia.
Yeah, I didn't know what. Sorry, Alicia, I got you. Do you have any advice on how to navigate teens who have phones and those who do not? Seems to be a point of contention with our youth programs. Wow. Cell phones are a hard one. And I've been trying to keep track with what happens in the school. So again, I have 3 kids and I'm trying to see what they do at school, if we could do the same thing in our youth programs, because then we're not introducing new rules. In schools, they've actually gone back and forth. Like some, depending on the teacher, like my kids in middle school, some teachers want the phones in the pocket at the front of the class. The other ones don't care. Or once you're done with your work, you can get your phone out. So I would really say try to find a balance. If people are constantly distracted, just say, hey guys, when we get to this part of the program, let's put all the phones away. And I would start off with like a generous offer. Say, hey, don't threaten to take them away. Just say, hey guys, please put your phones away once we start the lesson or whatever part of the program, and then see how our kids go. If they're being responsible, then keep it that way. But if they're not responding, then say, hey, when we get here, here's a bucket for all of our phones to be in. My kids know. I just say, hey, if I give you one warning, the next warning is I'm taking the phone and put it in my pocket for the rest of the day. And so you don't want to start off harsh, but I would say, hey, explain the expectation ahead of time, and then remind them a little bit, and then maybe do something a little more strict if they're not responding. So everybody hold on. Connor's gonna try to help me with my audio here.
Yeah, and just we'll use this time to kind of remind everybody that the other thing is that this is a collaborative question and answer time. So if you have like a response, if you're like, hey, like in my youth group, this thing worked really well, like jump in and say it because we're all kind of like bouncing ideas off of each other, right? So thank you for that question. Emmanuel, can you hear now?
Now I can hear. What was the question?
No, I was just saying that we can all kind of collaborate together. There's another question that says, our young people in this generation are the people who are less committed because of the environmental influence, such as technology, and everything is instant. So how can we address this concern among them if our core ministry is still in the old school way?
Well, it might be the hardest question of the year. Well, I think that's what's hard is a lot of times our churches, our core, we're operating 20 years ago. And especially if you have helpers that are my grandma's age, they have a certain style, right? And so what you probably want to do if you're core officer or youth leader is have maybe a leaders meeting where you just say, hey, I know the group of kids we're serving right now are really difficult. They come from really difficult backgrounds. Can we come up with a new way of dealing with it? Maybe let's be a little more gracious than we usually are. Because really, the more important thing is having the kids difficult within our building than them leaving because we're being too strict. Like we need to be able to build a relationship. And sometimes it's hard, it's really hard, but sometimes it may be moving a leader who wants to work hands-on with the kids to be the person that prepares the snacks or serves the dinner. So they're not directly disciplining the kids because their style is going to be very different and maybe some kids definitely won't respond to it. So it's a hard conversation, but if you're a core or a youth leader, I would say have those conversations aside and say, hey, well, let's try a different approach because the kids we serve are coming from homes where there's no expectations. So when we set expectations, it's hard. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but we just have to be a little more gracious as we do that.
Yeah, and Ernie commented and kind of saying that clear guidelines are often required for them to know that there is no gray area. And that's totally true, right? Like if you go through and you establish an expectation, I think just in the same way that Pavlov's law with the dog salivates when you hear the ring. If you don't consistently teach that, like, when you ask for the phone to go away, if it doesn't go away, this consequences, they'll begin to understand what consequences are going to happen, right? And these things, the consequences too, have to be catered to the actual person, because if it's a consequence that doesn't mean anything to them, then they're going to be like, well, like, what's the point? Any other questions that we might have?
Yes, I just want to comment on, I like the fact that he put out that we have to remember that every child that comes in does not know the word and the gospel. And that was something that really caught my eye and my ear, that because I am a Sunday school teacher, that as I put my story out there, every child does not know the gospel. I was raised in the church, so thank you for that input.
You're welcome, Dan, and thank you for sharing that.
Any other questions? You can type them in the chat or you can unmute yourself, raise your hand, whatever. A question that I have for you, Emmanuel, is, or just really for anybody who might have an answer, but how do we kind of utilize the language of our young people without losing the authenticity of like our generational thing, right? So like, like I'm not like how do I be able to communicate in language that is like on par with where my kids are at? While also still being authentic, right? Because those are kind of like opposite things, right? Of like using the word riz if that's not in your general vocabulary, but how do you kind of find that balance?
I will go and then others can jump in. So again, this is an experiment I run on my kids all the time, is when you ask what is what does this word mean? They love educating us what those means. And I say, hey, how would you use that in a sentence? So I usually do those things offline in just side conversations because they love teaching us. So if they're telling me this actually, we're building a relationship. So they're teaching me something because I'm usually the one teaching them, but now they're teaching me something and they just love that. So I don't use those words like in front when I'm teaching, but inside conversations, like sometimes I would randomly use 5 or 6 of these youth words and my kids just start laughing. What are we having? We have memories, right, of us just talking about things. I just know the advice to me is don't say this in front of people and don't say this at youth group, right? But I always find a way of slipping one of them in because that's just kind of my personality. But it's really the relationship. When we say teach me something, they love to. Like the example I gave with the video editing, my kids were so proud to show me. In one of my videos, you can actually delete like the kind of the signature at the end. And I put my video with that. And like, Dad, should have asked me, I could have helped you with that. So they love teaching us. So if we can do that offline, it's just once we're teaching in front of them, then you don't really need to add those words. But if you're having side conversations and laughing about things, I feel like that's safe.
Any other questions or comments about Generation Alpha?
I had a quick question as well. How would you recommend navigating kind of like the intergenerational relationships throughout programming? Whether it's if you go to more of a traditional core with retired officers, being able to kind of gear your ministry to both sides of the spectrum.
I think it's relationship. It's going to take a little more of our time, all of us. But I think it's relationships. I think when kids know I love and care for them, and then when I interact with the more mature, as I like to use, a term I like to use, the more mature part of the members, the core, if we still show the same love and care and respect, like it's amazing how after a while it feels like one big family. It doesn't mean there's no fighting or disagreement, but they can earn our respect and we can earn their respect. Like the last court that my wife and I were in, we had a lot of little kids and then a lot of people that were in retirement age, but we felt like we could have meaningful conversations and relationships with people in at both ends of the spectrum because we had that respect. And then we'll ask questions. What was life like for you as a kid? What was, because some of them said, oh, I went to this corps, as a corps cadet. So like, what was that like for you? So when we ask questions of people and they tell us about their life or their experience, it is a way of endearing us to them. So instead of me always coming in as the one that knows things, ask questions. And that's a hard one for me because I love to talk, as you can probably tell. But I have to slow myself down and ask questions and actually listen to what they're saying. We would sometimes take our kids with us to visit some of our core members, and it was amazing them that retired and the way they would connect with our kids. And sometimes I'll just watch the interaction because they love to share what they have. And like one of the guys that just had knee surgery, like, you want to see the incision? I was like, but it was like they still talk about it today. So they just got to interact. So if we can find ways of involving people like that, I loved like Vacation Bible School. Would have a lot of kids, but would have the older members of our core. They would do the snacks and the coffee, like all those other things, so that we're all in the same space. They may not be the ones running a game because that's going to take a little more, but they could still do things that they can help to interact with one another without maybe being like the disciplinarian. Because I feel like that's usually the rub is how we know to discipline today, especially with PTM and other things, is different than when you could just pull a kid's ear back in the day, right? So you don't want those other people being the disciplinarian, but you can still connect them in other spaces.
So Randy commented saying that their time is not something that he has. And I think that does prompt a good question of what should people do when they don't have time to invest in those relationships and kind of learn more about that generation and then those specific kids. Like, what is a strategy that we can implement when we seem to be running around and we don't have the time to invest in that way?
Yeah, that's a really good one, Randy. We don't have time. But maybe doing it, I know in the Army it's hard as an officer, at least I feel like, okay, I got 3 years in this Corps. If I'm lucky, I'll get to 5. So it feels like I gotta do it all. But what if I decided this month I'm gonna go, say, if this family, I know their kid plays soccer, I'm gonna go watch one of their soccer games. Like that is going to go a long way, going to watch a soccer game for them. I remember going to a young lady's graduation. Her mom wasn't able to attend because she was struggling with life. Being there for a graduation was really meaningful. So we may not be able to hang out with them all the time, but if you can find moments here and there, especially things that are like a big deal, graduations, or maybe a child is sick, you visit them, or an older person, like find those moments where you can make that touch point, because that helps them come to you later, or you be able to have an easier conversation later because they'll remember the time that you came to a soccer game. We have had people since we moved down here that have come to my kids' soccer games, and it's meant a lot to me, and it's meant a lot to their kids. They don't see them every day. We don't go to the same Corps, but when they came to the soccer game, that made a lasting impression. So I would say if you can find those moments, those touch points, that's what we got to do. We can't possibly spend every hour of the day with everyone, but if we could pick and choose, especially if you see maybe a family that's struggling, I'm not saying you neglect everybody else, but maybe that's where our attention needs to be a little more.
And I think that there's also value investing in volunteers and other youth leaders that are within your core, right? Like I'm grateful to our core in Torrance. We have a really solid group of leaders that maybe can't always go to our core officers can't necessarily go to everything, but Emmanuel and Jennifer help and lead things, and we have David Widoff and Jody Ann Mulch, and like a couple of different people that are consistently at the core that when me and Emmanuel and Jennifer are all at TYLC, then we still have people at the core who are leaders who can invest in our kids and be there. So I think there's so much value in investing in volunteers, and it does mean that there has to be communication of consistency, right? That kind of communication and training needs to be developed a lot stronger. But unfortunately, the Salvation Army is designed in a way where it can't rely only on one person, one physical person. Rely on God, but He uses us through that. So I think that's important as well. Any other questions or comments?
James, in smaller corps, it's difficult to gather volunteers. When we first got here at our current location, we didn't have any youth at all or any volunteers. We started asking for individuals who'd want to help with youth, and we got 3. And by the time we started youth programs, we had 3, and then we got 1 more on board. And last Thursday, we had 10 kids. It's just been a blessing bringing volunteers, trying to find volunteers, and they're not young volunteers. They're all older than me. So it's just the reality of doing your best with what you have.
Thanks. That's great.
It's good. Thank you for sharing that. And sometimes we think just because they're a lot older than us, they may not work. They might have a place. They may not be the one running a game, an active game, but there's something they can do. I remember one time, one of our youth leaders, before I was an officer, asking one of these retired officers to come and do teen night. And I was kind of like, are you sure they can preach a teen night? But it was amazing. Like the way she connected with the teens and the message, it was like, wow, it really showed me sometimes I'm limiting people just because of who they are, but God can use anybody. So yeah, thank you, John, for sharing that.
And also just like using different people's like talents too. Like I'm not a band person. I've never been a band person. I got kicked out of band in elementary school. And instead of helping out with band, I do creative kid at our core. And it's like for all of the kids who don't do band, and we just hang out and do crafts. And like sometimes we just need to be a little creative with making sure, and like that's helping to engage the kids that maybe can't read music or don't have time to practice their band instruments or don't have the money for the band instruments, right? It's providing different avenues where we can. Emmanuel, we'll have maybe one or two more questions. If anybody has questions that they want to put into the chat, but I'll ask the question of how do you feel like what are some good strategies with balancing that independence versus the boundaries, right? Of being able to encourage that independence. And you kind of gave an example, but what are some other ways that we can help our kids feel independent while also maintaining boundaries so that they can develop that critical thinking?
Yeah, I would say like having a plan. So I love I love plans. So when we were core officers, we'd always have like a year's calendar, but then the quarter had the details. So if you know on this night, this is the activity, making sure we have enough supervisors, volunteers, adults in the room, and then knowing where they are. Like sometimes at a youth group, I may not be involved in the conversation with the kids because they're kind of talking, but I'm still with it close enough to hear if they start talking about inappropriate things. As a parent, it's something I use with my own kids. Like sometimes I'm like, what, you were listening? Yeah, because I'm here. So sometimes it's even if it's just a time where it's just a social time where they're just talking and hanging out, but you still have adults close enough to hear or see if things are not appropriate. Especially where there are devices involved, like I will randomly walk around the table, like say it at our core when our kids are having dinner, all the kids sit at one table and all of them are socializing with their phones in their hands. This is before program starts, it's dinner time, but I will randomly just walk around and look at what's on the screen. And I do that with my own kids at home. They're always playing something and I randomly walk by and see because you just don't know what's going to happen. So I'm giving them that independence to pick and choose what they're doing, but there's enough supervision if something is not right. And so if you have maybe the first 15 minutes of program that are not as strictly supervised, or it's just kind of hangout time, but you still want to be close enough to see what it is. At one of our core, we used to have like an open gym time for the first 15 minutes where kids were just in there. So we'd always have adults in the room, but they didn't have to be playing basketball, volleyball, whatever it was, or they could engage, but it still gave that freedom, but with still supervision is there. So, and the kids don't actually realize they're still being supervised. They feel like, yeah, we got freedom, but no, we got people watching and listening. So as long as you know what your space looks like, and then you also know some of the kids that might be trouble, we want to be a little close to them, and then you usually kind of know the kids that are a little less responsible than the others.
Yeah, and I think also like not always necessarily independence based on what their definition of what independence is. Like I think about our core cadets at the core. I'm the assistant core cadet leader, and our core cadet leader Dave, he like will always, anytime we're closing in prayer or whatever, he'll be like, oh, does anybody want to pray? And nobody offers because they're all shy. And I'm like, Dave, we gotta force them to pray sometimes. And it's like not necessarily being like, hey, you pray, but like trying to create a system with which it pushes them a little bit outside of their comfort zone, right? Of like encouraging some independence and a little bit of pushing, but right in that like zone of proximal development for like the education people of like just pushing it there so that they're being pushed in a way that things that they may not always choose to do, but still pushing them a little bit, and making sure they feel safe at the same time, right? Last questions, anybody in the chat?
I see Randy had a comment here. A backup plan, because sometimes you have to learn the crowd and test the waters on what may draw the majority in. Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like, as you get to know the kids, you know the things they like and the things they don't. I remember for meals at one of our core, like spaghetti night, because we always did youth night, including it all started at dinner. And the night it was spaghetti night, kids will be like so over the top happy about spaghetti. And so when you just get to know them, you know the things that you're gonna get a little more feedback. And if it's playing a game, like we've been visiting like the Torrance core, and there's this mingle mingle game. Mingle mingle is so simple, but the teenagers are playing it every Friday. I'm like, does this get old? But they just love it. So for you find those things that work and you do those. If they start to feel old, then move it out. But if the kids are saying we want more of this, it's kind of one of those times where they're feeling like, well, we have a choice and we got what we asked for. And as long as the things is good and safe and appropriate. Well, thank you guys. You've been amazing listeners and great questions and discussions. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, someone's requested that you share what Mingle Mingle is, Emmanuel.
Oh yeah. Seriously, I would even play this with young adults. It's fun. So mingle, mingle, basically, if you have a group of 10 kids, you just say mingle, 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 and they say walking around, and you say get in groups of 5. And then they all have to get in groups of 5. And then the person that is not in a group, then they get sadly out. So you keep changing the numbers until basically you have the winner at the end. So you could offer a prize for the last person standing, or they just get bragging rights. But it's one that it's Redondo right now. They'll play 5-6 times with teenagers, and they just love it because it's a little bit competitive, but not like over the top competitive. Like the first time I played it there, I was like new to the thing, but it was so funny. These girls are like shoving me out of the group. I'm like, what? I just got here. But it was just a lot of fun. So you change it up. So you've got, once you're down to 6, you could say groups of 3, whatever. It kind of helps people go out, and until you come down to one who's the winner. And it's almost kind of like musical chairs.
And Randy also said you can add in get to know you questions for the groups as well.
Mhm.
And that's really important, making sure that people have time to talk to each other as well. That's part of the independence, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and that's what's good is you can make it where it's just straight up round after round for fun, or in between each rounds, once they're in the group of 3, then you do the questions. The only thing is you don't want to be eliminating people if you're going to be asking the questions for them to talk. But yeah, you could use it to where people are not being eliminated, but they're getting to meet new people.
Okay, well, we'll finish off there. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for the Armory. We'll be meeting again in 2 weeks, talking about understanding Gen Z. Everybody who was on this call will be put into an opportunity to win a pair of At the Table Salvation Army socks. So if you win, we'll post it on Instagram and we'll email you to get your address to send the socks. So thank you guys all so much for joining us for another season of the Armory, and we're so happy to be back. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.